Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
Dustin Ray.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're going to discuss whether Conway's law applies to software quality. So Conway's law, for those who aren't familiar, it's a theorem more than a law where the idea is that a company's structure will mirror how it communicates. And so if you've got siloed communications, the company will end up with lots of silos and lots of redundancy. And if you've got lots of broad cross-talking, then you'll get a different structure. And what we're going to discuss today is, does your company's code quality also reflect your company's culture or structure, basically? Is unmaintainable code a sign that you've got a toxic company? I would say probably yes.
Why, yes.
Yeah.
Well, anecdotally, I guess every company I've been at with the worst code all had terribly toxic cultures, and so to me,
Okay.
the things that make a company culture toxic, right? The high stress, everything's an emergency, no pre-planning, so everything is reactive instead of acting with intention. All of those are the things that push you to have bad code, where you're going to skip the tests because you think that'll get you in production faster, or because the requirements change at the last minute and now you don't have time to rewrite everything. And those kind of always disaster, always reactive companies tend to have bad code because there's no forethought. It's just everyone's reacting.
So my first gut reaction to this is like, when I think toxic, I don't think what you've outlined, because the people can still be good, and what you've described to me is like almost just a startup vibe, right? Like the nature of a startup is you're going to have to move fast and change things on a dime, and you don't really maybe the forethought you did have actually was the wrong thing, and the customer needs something else. So you just have to move really fast, and your code has to reflect that. But when I think
Yes,
toxic,
but
I
in a
think bad
startup,
people.
well, in a startup, you've got the expectation that you're moving fast, and theoretically, the culture is respectful and expects that everything's going to be moving fast. Whereas in a established company that is toxic, there is blame attached with all of the
Okay.
urgency. This is now urgent because you didn't do something that you couldn't possibly have known about before I walked in the door. Therefore, this is your fault. Whereas with a startup, it's like, oh, you know what, that didn't work. Let's shift everything 180 degrees because we've learned something. The element of learning, I think, is the big one. Learning versus blaming.
Yeah, I like what you were saying too about, and we've used this framing in the podcast before about, like, let's assume everybody is well intentioned and wants to do a good job, because I can definitely think of at least a few instances where I've been on teams where everybody wants to do a good job, everybody's a good person, everybody's a team player, but there is a sense of like, in a team where everybody is, I'll call it this way, almost like too nice and never pushes back on anything, there can be kind of like a yes man, yes person kind of culture where, a stakeholder may say, hey, we need this by June 30th or whatever, right? Or next month. And everyone just agrees to it without even really deciding or talking about what success looks like. But everyone's just hearing, we can do this thing by a certain date. The problem is, maybe everybody's expectations about what that thing is going to be by that date may be different. And I think
Well,
you can kind of get into a situation there with, if the communication between engineers or, whoever's the team on the project and the stakeholders, if there's no psychological safety to kind of push back and say, hey, this isn't realistic, then I think, yes, that proves the point that your code base will start to mirror your communication patterns, because since the communication's not happening, the code's kind of coming in, not exactly as expected.
Right. Well, in another example that I've seen many times in my career, you have this yes culture, and it results in lots of terrible features bloating your code base. It's like, oh, can we make the code do this? Yes, we can, and they do it, and it's well written in these cases, but it's a useless feature. or it's a feature that's actively makes the system worse because now it's confusing, because now there's two options and it's not clear why you'd use either one or what the difference is. And so this yes culture of no pushback, yes, we'll do whatever you want, creates terrible code, feature bloated, a code bloated with terrible features that are well written.
Right.
Interesting.
I think you can see the same thing even within the engineering culture, right? So if you have the same thing of between like either a team member and a tech lead, or a tech lead and like a staff or a principal engineer, where designs and architecture are just getting like approved with no really thought or pushback from the people actually like working in the system, that can kind of, I think, lead to the same thing. And the same thing, and I see it in code review a lot, where the culture around code review is just check the box. Yep, you're good. Every PR is good. No comments, no feedback. And it's like, if every PR you review doesn't have like at least a comment, I mean, are you really even doing your job? Like the likelihood that everyone's getting it perfect 100% of the time and there's nothing that they could have improved in that PR it's very unlikely.
Or the PRs are very small.
Yeah.
Like right now where I am, we've got a culture of small PRs. And so I probably give comments less than half the time, because it's like, hey, I made this one specific change. It's like, yep, there's that one specific change that you said you were making.
Right. But then it's, you look at the full life cycle too, is their documentation, is their tests, and I think it sounds like in your case, right, you're talking about a well-oiled culture where everyone's bought into the same principles. And I think, that it further proves the point that Conway's law is kind of playing out in your code base.
Right. Yes. We have people generally don't give a lot of comments because we have this culture of small MR. And not to say, I still put comments like at least a third of the time, and they're usually questions rather than like, are you sure that this is the way it's supposed to be? And they'll be like, yeah, I talked to the product person. I'm like, okay, cool.
Right. So maybe on the flip side of that, if you notice some of these signals, right, like one of the signals I would say is every PR is getting approved with no comments, or you'd have no code review process. Maybe what are some other signals that could maybe either signal, in your case, Isa, you were talking about, how do I realize I'm in like my culture has become toxic? It doesn't mean that the people are toxic, but that the culture is no longer serving us.
Got it. Yeah, the framing of essentially toxic positivity, the way Jeffrey outlining it, is not an angle I was really thinking about when I made the comment. So that's an interesting one too. Saying yes to everything, it not only has you build the wrong thing and add stress to people, but I think you end up just going in the wrong direction. You're doing a disservice to the company itself too, because you're wasting resources in the saying yes without actually understanding what you're saying yes to. So that's kind of interesting.
Right, but that's probably part of the culture, is just saying yes to hero.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you're touching on the hero problem, which is what I was going to bring up next. I think that's kind of like my most famous, or like the most famous kind of problem you see with this. And it sounds very sinister at first when you hear about the hero problem. You think, well, darn this hero taking away opportunities from their teammates to shine and all of this, but that's not exactly how it happens, right? Like it's really a management problem more than it is an individual contributor problem, because the manager has essentially set up expectations, to your point, Jeffrey, to come in and swoop in, be the hero, save the day. Now you get praise for that, which maybe we did need it in that case. But the real solution is, what could we have done to prevent you from needing to be a hero in the first place? Yeah. And I think that goes unsaid and like unpraised more often than swooping in and being the hero from time to time.
Yeah, well, that brings up the flip side. Is, since we seem to agree that Conway's law applies to your code your company's code space, right? Not only will your code reflect your company's structure, but the code quality will also reflect your company's culture. How do you... Well, let me ask two questions. First, if you're starting at a company, how do you recognize what it is before you're totally, subsumed in it and you cease to see it? And leads me to two is, how do you start changing it?
Right. So how do you recognize you're drinking from the Kool-Aid before you start drinking from the Kool-Aid? Sounds like
well, how do you recognize the flavor of the Kool-Aid before you're
right.
Because we're saying this is always true that the code base will always reflect the company's communication. And if you want to change it, you need to recognize what you're seeing before you just become immune to it. Not immune, but you just stop seeing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, I think one looking at their culture of code review and then feedback in general. Like if you even can even find this out in the interview process, what is your annual review process for feedback, or what kind of feedback do you typically provide? If everything is really rainbows and unicorns, and that's probably a red flag, especially as you get going into your first 90 days. If you're not getting any feedback from your manager, you may be in kind of like one of those cultures of we're not really worried about growth, or we're saying that, but we're not really doing what's needed to actually move the needle. So I would say that's probably one of the main like signals to catch that you're in that kind of culture. And the hero problem, if you see the same hero kind of behavior and pattern over and over again, there's always this superstar saving the team. That's usually an indication that it's not necessarily a great performer. It may be, but there's actually a management problem underlying there that needs to be resolved.
And hopefully before you even do the 90-day thing, maybe even in the interview process, asking those kind of questions, how do you do the PR review? Asking the pointed questions. Have you guys ever built a feature you realized was the wrong thing? What did you do about that? How are you making sure you don't do that again? And just trying to dig at answers and kind of get like a feel for the culture before you even say yes to an offer. It would suck to realize 30 days in that you are in a cult and drinking from the Kool-Aid, after you've accepted your offer.
Well, it's not that a cult, because you're always going to be, right? The code will always reflect the culture, and the culture, you need to find a company where you fit in, or you want to fit in. And so that's always a thing. It's just some are going to be better fits than others. Like maybe you like being a hero. It's not good for you, but if that's what you want to do, there are companies, and I know people who enjoy being the hero, and companies that will hire heroes and pay them well to abuse the heck out of them, and everyone's happy with that.
That could be a separate episode all on its own. That's a very interesting topic. Is it a bad thing if everyone's happy with it? Is abuse bad if everyone's having a good time?
That's the phrase consenting adults.
That is an excellent topic for next time.
So let's say you're not, though, right? Like, what if you wanted to change it, right? So then how do you actually go about changing that culture if nobody's... I think awareness is the first step, right? Highlighting what things could be like, maybe, reference our podcast. That might help.
And seeing what the general vibe is of the company culture. Are they willing to change? Like, is this something? Is this an uphill battle? Is it worth fighting? Is it something, they're not going to change anyway?
True.
But yeah, identifying that there's a problem definitely is the first step. Trying to change it. Yeah, if they're willing to change it, then I don't know. Jeffrey, any ideas? How would you try to guide a culture change?
Well, you can't expect it to be quick unless it's like a startup and it's 4 people.
Right.
Because then you can just have a conversation with the 4 people and you guys can all agree. But otherwise, because one of the things about Conway's law is changing whatever you've got to something else is a long, slow process. And it neither can be pushed in from the top without firing lots of people, or come up from the bottom without a lot of time. And it's important to realize that. So like if your code base is great, then great. But if your code base is terrible because projects are always last minute with tight deadlines or unrealistic deadlines, you aren't going to be able to say, oh, well, we really need to establish best practices and require 80% code coverage on tests and all, because people, the same forces that push the problem in the first place are just going to push right through that. And so trying to the code, the code is reflecting the culture, and so it's a long, slow slog. And if you understand that slog, I think you can succeed. But if you think, oh, I just need to fix the code, it won't work. That's where you're going to get burned out and destroyed.
I think too, you got to have patience and energy for it. I know there's sometimes where, if I'm going against, even if it's a culture of a particular team and they're really opinionated and they're not willing to change, at some point I'm like, all right, is this worth the energy and effort I'm putting into to make it change? Or are they so aligned with what they're going to do that I just need to either get on board or swap teams?
I have swapped many teams because I couldn't get in alignment with them. I've also recommended many teams be broken up, but nobody ever has taken that suggestion. So I can't tell you how well that would work.
Yeah, team dynamics is like another topic for another day we could probably hit.
Yeah.
Jeffrey's like, I will destroy this culture that I don't like by suggesting it be broken up.
Yes, exactly right.
I think
and yet no one ever takes me up on that offer.
I mean, one thing I think that you can do, even to your point, Jeffrey, how can you start to break up a team strategically? One thing I've seen work really well is like kind of initiative planting. And I've seen this work in both agencies and in product companies. So if you have a team that's like really aligned, but it's almost toxic for the rest of the culture, like if you're in a team of teams situation, and it's like this one team wants to do things their own way, they're highly productive, but they don't get along with every other team, they're not using the company systems, whatever. One thing I've seen be effective in kind of breaking that up is like a planted initiative, and that can be either each of those team members or some of the main team members get pulled off into like their own kind of initiatives, and then now they're kind of forced to like storm and norm again, right? And so like that, you kind of like break that up, and then even if they come back to their home team, it's different now. So it's like the culture has shifted. So like I say initiatives, what I really mean is like special projects, right? So like that could be anything. That could be performance related. It could be hey, we want to go try out this new technology, or this this service over here has been neglected for so long, we're going to put a special ops team on it, hit it for 3 months, and then you go.
Dustin, that sounds perilously close to a rewrite project, which I'm sure you would never suggest.
Not close to a rewrite. Not close to a
We're just gonna there's this neglected system over here, and we're just going to put some people on it for 3 months. 3 months, Dustin.
Just to bring it back, just to maintenance it. Maybe it has no tests. You're bringing up the code coverage, whatever, right? Like whatever the initiative is, that's the point, is to break that monotonous team up.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at, and I can see the distinction there too. It's just
I'm just giving you.
Yeah, I know.
It's more of like a change of scenery for a team briefly to kind of like reset being stuck in this kind of cycle of whatever the culture was, or this kind of reinforced culture. Just kind of like, okay, let's shake things up. Let's pull you off for a bit and put you on some project to kind of refocus the lens, I think.
Yeah.
Right. And this is something that like a program manager can do, a VP of engineering, a direct, say if you're, to me, this screams, hey, I'm the director or VP of a company. I just came in. They've got all these problems. And I definitely see the culture. How do I start to shift the culture? And it's like, I think, putting in some special projects that kind of like shakes things up, change the scenery, change the teams around. And I think you can kind of, get there. Step by
maybe
step. It's a long process.
Maybe some of those projects where people or developers have been complaining a long time about X, Y, and Z, and they've never gotten a chance to get around to it. And a new change of leadership is like a good opportunity to kind of be like, okay, well, I hear your concerns. Let's see what we can do here. That might be kind of a good fragmenting point.
Awesome. Well, I think, should we leave it there?
Yeah.
All right. So in summary, yes, your code base also reflects, your code quality reflects Conway's law as well as your code base structure. And it's important to know what you're in for, or to understand what you're in for, so that you can act appropriately. And the only thing that we've really have seen that helps shift culture is to split up teams and move people around. But either way, it's always going to be a long, slow process. All right. Thank you all for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
Dustin Ray.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.